All right, guys, welcome back to the show. Sorry about the long absence. I got really busy with school and family and just kind of ran out of time for it for a while. I'm hoping to get back to doing this on a more regular schedule, so hopefully I'll have one or two videos a week. Now, before we get started, as always, if you like the show, please consider subscribing, and if you disagree with anything I say, drop a comment because I do my best to respond. Now, last episode was a long time ago, so pretty far back into the season, so I didn't get to do any predictions for the Super Bowl or the playoffs. But a pretty surprising playoff run, all things considered. Patriots made the Super Bowl with Drake May. As we all know, they got dominated by the Seahawks. Most people have seen the game, so I won't go over too much a summary of what happened. But just in general, once I saw the matchup, I thought Seattle would win easily. I didn't think it would look like that. That was an absolute domination. What I did think, though, is after seeing the NFC Championship game and the AFC Championship game, I felt like the Patriots really wanted to play the Rams instead of the Seahawks based off of how the AFC Championship went. The fact that they couldn't really move the ball at all, even in the bad weather against the Broncos, really made me think that the only way they could win the Super Bowl was in a shootout, and the Rams defense hasn't been good since the start of the year. So they had a way better chance of that than against the Seahawks. Of course, based on how the game went, I think either of the NFC teams would have crushed the Patriots. But I think the Seahawks were just a terrible matchup for them. Now, a lot of people say it was a terrible game, and it kind of was, but it was the most entertaining bad game I've ever seen. I mean, it was, for a game that was 12-0 at halftime, there were a lot of splash plays. Kenneth Walker was electric. He was a ton of fun to watch, had some big explosive runs to carry the offense of both teams, really. And there were a lot of splash defensive plays. And if you like watching good defense and good defensive lines, the Seahawks were awesome. I mean, they sacked Drake May, I think it was 5 or 6 times, but I mean, it felt like they sacked him 15 times. It was because on every set of downs, there was at least one play where Drake May was getting knocked down. And on the note of Drake May, I mean, he obviously played terribly. He hasn't been good in the playoffs so far. I think he'll get better. He's still only in his second year, and he was, even though they were playing a lot of bad teams, he showed he was still able to be a very good quarterback in the regular season. And you don't see those kinds of numbers getting put up by someone who's just a bum. So unless he's going to have just a Justin Herbert-esque fall off in the playoffs, then I think the Patriots are in a really good spot going forward. Will Campbell is obviously going to be a big question of the offseason because they drafted him to be a franchise left tackle, and so far it doesn't look like he's going to be that. I'd expect him to be moved to left guard next season, where I think he could be dominant because usually I don't care about the arm length thing, but he has short arms, and he was getting manhandled all season by any defensive lineman who had long arms. So it seems like it's a big problem for him, especially since he doesn't seem to have the physical gifts to be a franchise left tackle. I don't think he has the power or the agility, really. And especially with offensive linemen, that's not a position where you just see guys randomly get strong. When you come into the league, you're about as strong as you're going to be. So I don't see a world in 3 years where Will Campbell has all of a sudden become a good enough athlete to be an elite left tackle. You can see that with guys like, look at Josh Simmons on the Chiefs, right? Even though he's a little bit smaller than you might want in left tackle, he's so fast and such a great athlete, so powerful that he can make up for it, and he was excellent when he was on the field this year. That's something you can't teach, and I don't think Will Campbell's going to be able to get it, but I think he'll make a hell of a guard, or maybe even a center, although that comes with a different skill set. Now, with the Seahawks were an excellent team all year. After they won the Super Bowl, it just seems obvious that they were going to win it the whole season long. I mean, their 3 losses were by a combined 3 points. Looking back in hindsight, everybody's going to be thinking, well, why weren't we picking this team all year long? And the obvious answer is that it was Sam Darnold. Everybody thought, me included, that he was going to falter in the playoffs again like he did last year. I mean, he was terrible in gotta-have-it games last season. But this year, I mean, he completely changed that. He was good in every playoff game. He had an all-time performance in the NFC Championship. And he's, I think, the only quarterback in Super Bowl history to go, or I should say the NFL history in the Super Bowl era, to go an entire playoff run without having a turnover or a fumble. I think 2022, Patrick Mahomes didn't have a turnover, but he did drop a fumble at one point that they recovered. So Sam Darnold is breathing some rare air. He answered a ton of questions. Even though he didn't play great in the Super Bowl, that Super Bowl was a real turning point for him where even though he didn't play great, he was able to not give away the game. Because historically, he's been very, very hot or cold. If he's hot, he's going to light you up, but if he has a bad start to the game, he's liable to give you 1 or 2 turnovers, which is how the Patriots were playing him early. They were blitzing Felt all the time, and they were really playing hoping that Sam Darnold was going to give them a turnover or 2, and he didn't. And that's really a great step for him, and it's just a great story for a guy who was on such terrible teams for most of his career and did have real problems as a player. That's something I don't think a lot of people are giving Sam Darnold enough credit, because they're saying his early career failures were because he was on such terrible teams. I think he had real limitations skill-wise as a quarterback when he was younger, that he has put in a ton of work to actually develop his skill set and become great, develop his ability to read the field. That's something, Kyle Shanahan talked about when he was on the 49ers, was that this guy was, he was such a he was such a great talent that when he got there, it was just a lot of them building up his confidence. And then he was able to learn how to read the field and be a more cerebral quarterback, at least. So it's a great story for him. Now, for next season with the Patriots and what they're going to look like, I do expect a pretty severe regression for them because of just how historically terrible their schedule was, and especially considering how many bad teams there were in the NFL this year. Especially in the AFC, it felt like there were a ton of just terrible bottom feeder teams. I mean, the Raiders were one of the worst teams I've ever seen this year. They were horrific. And the Browns were terrible. Titans were awful. There was just a ton of bad teams, I think more than usual. And there were only a couple of great teams. I think the only great teams in the NFL this season were the Rams and the Seahawks. Now, as for the Seahawks, a lot of people have been asking how good is this Seahawks as an all-time team. And this conversation really reminds me a lot of the conversation around the Eagles after last year, because they won the Super Bowl in such dominating fashion. But I don't actually know. I don't know if they're going to be able to keep it up. Obviously, nobody knows, because it seemed like last year's Eagles were set up for consistent success. They were a pretty young team. Howie Roseman had the contracts all laid out where they weren't going to have a ton of roster turnover. But that team just has so many cultural problems. That's one of the only teams I can think of where they, year after year, seem to have all the talent in the world, and the only thing that stops them is they have a ton of weird culture problems, questions about the head coach. The quarterback doesn't seem to have great control of the locker room. And the reason I say that is that it seemed like A.J. Brown a lot this year was getting support from the locker room just because guys weren't coming out and supporting Jalen Hurts. All that aside, what I'm trying to say is that a single dominant season doesn't necessarily suggest that that the Seahawks are just about to rip off a dynasty. Because I think if you looked over the course of last season, a lot of people would say that last year's Eagles team was better than this year's Seahawks team. They just had more top-end talent. Now, I think the Seahawks team, their best quality is that they are by committee. They don't have a bad player on the roster. I mean, especially on defense. Their defense, they go probably 8 out of 11 of their guys are like B-plus players. They don't have a single game record, but they have guys who could potentially become top of the pile players like Warry. Warry was incredible. I thought he had an outsized impact on the game, even though he didn't put up a ton of numbers. But I think they are set up for success. Definitely, I expect them to be really good again next season. I just don't want to call them an all-time team yet until I see what they look like next season. They can be an all-time single season run for sure. But I think the lack of other great teams and it only being 1 year so far, and it's not like Sam Darnold has a long cachet of being a great quarterback. And then as for being an all-time defense, there weren't that many great offenses in the NFL this year. I think the team that led in points per game was the Patriots, and everybody this year thought the Patriots. Well, most people thought the Patriots had some real problems based off of how easy their schedule was and how bad they looked in the playoffs. Now, it is hard to call the Seahawks an all-time defense because the Rams lit them up twice. And I think the Rams' offense was really good this season, great. But I don't know if they were an all-time offense. It felt like they didn't quite get the production out of the run game that you'd want. But you could make a case that they're an all-time offense. I think there's a really good shot you could say that they have an all-time wide receiver room. Any wide receiver room where you can call Devontae Adams your number 2 is going to be one of the best wide receiver rooms I've ever seen. And Puka Nacua was on a different level this year, even though JSN had more yards, more stats. Just watching the game, I felt like Puka was on a different level from everybody else this year. I mean, I'm talking everybody. Jamar Chase, obviously Justin Jefferson had a bad year. I don't know. I just felt like Puka felt like more of a game breaker than JSN. It felt like if you needed a big play at the end of the game, you could just force the ball to Puka and he would pull it down. So that's why I'd say it's hard to call him an all-time defense. If they do this again next year, I think that becomes a much easier conversation to have. All right, so now, moving on from the Super Bowl, I do want to talk a little bit about how the playoffs went, some of my broader thoughts. For the Chargers, I still don't know what to do with Justin Herbert in the playoffs. He's been so bad, it's hard to say it's not his fault, at least a little bit at this point. Now, the offensive line was just torn to pieces this postseason, but the fact that he's just laid an absolute stinker in every one of his playoff games. I think he's just got some kind of mental thing about the playoffs that he's got to get past. So yeah, question the Chargers to be a lot better once their offensive line gets healthy, but I would like to see Justin Herbert actually do something in the playoffs for once, because right now, he has one of the biggest drop-offs from regular season production to the playoffs I've ever seen, by the eye test and by the numbers. And then for the Texans, speaking of quarterbacks who everybody seems to think is amazing, I don't know what to do with CJ Stroud at this point. Because coming off of his rookie year, everybody thought he was just going to be incredible. I mean, I thought he was going to regress a little bit going into his sophomore year, but he got way worse going into his sophomore year, and he was way worse again this year. I mean, he went from a guy people were picking as an MVP candidate to, I don't know if he's even a top 15 quarterback in this league. If you ask me right now, would I rather have Sam Darnold or CJ Stroud? It's easily 110% Sam Darnold. If you asked me if I'd rather have Daniel Jones or CJ Stroud, I'd have to really think about it. I don't know if I would pick Daniel Jones, but the fact that that's even a question after what people thought he was going to do from his rookie year, it's insane. That Texans defense was good enough to carry somebody to the Super Bowl. I think they were actually the best defense in the NFL, better than the Seahawks defense. All they needed was to not just have an absolute stinker by the quarterback. They just needed their quarterback to play competent football and Stroud could not do it. I mean, he threw 4 interceptions, one of the worst playoff performances I've ever seen. Really, that goes for a lot of players this postseason, especially in the AFC. You know, people love to hate on the Chiefs, but the quality of quarterback play seemed to take a sharp nosedive without Patrick Mahomes there. I mean, you have Josh Allen. People have been and will continue to talk about the interception calls at the end. I think based off of, there was a side angle I saw where I think it was pretty clearly an interception. But it's a 50-50 call. There was one play, the play at the end of the first half, where Josh Allen rolled the ball back to his offensive lineman to try to pick up extra yards for no reason. And that was a turnover that the Broncos got 3 points out of. You make a play like that, just the most unforced error I've ever seen, you void all right to be complaining about a call at the end of the game, a 50-50 call. So, yeah, there was not a lot of great quarterback play in the playoffs. And it is hard. I think this is going to be one of the most interesting off seasons in the past several years, because it's going to be really hard to tell who's going to be good next year. I don't know if the Patriots are going to be an elite team again. They just made the Super Bowl. They might not win 11 games next year. Like, I could see them only winning 10. So, yeah, you know, the Rams, Matthew Stafford's going to be a year older. With some of the off-the-field issues, I actually am not 100% sure Puka is going to be on the team next year. The Rams don't like controversy, and if Puka is being an off-the-field distraction, I could easily see them shipping him off for a couple of first-round picks. Yeah, speaking of the offseason, being a Kansas Cityan, I am going to talk about the Chiefs because they're my favorite team. So, their offseason, based off of, here's how I think their offseason should go, based on this season. The last episode I made, I think, was right before their bye week. And their bye week was where the wheels came flying off. Prior to that, Mahomes was he was performing just a hard carry job on them. Doing everything he can. He was leading the team in rushing. Nobody on the team was making game-breaking plays. The play calling was stale, and nobody was getting open. His receivers, all 3 of his main receivers, were in the bottom half of the NFL in terms of separation, average separation on routes, and their contested catch rate. So there was no separation. There was nothing he could do that was easy. And after the bye week, I mean, they played Buffalo, lost, played Broncos, lost. Just the wheels came flying off. It was terrible. Injuries started to pile up. And by the end of the year, when Mahomes finally got injured, I hated to see it, but I was also a little bit relieved because it just felt like, man, finally this team is being put out of their misery. And honestly, it was cathartic as a Chiefs fan to see how terrible the team looked with the backup quarterback in, because it felt like the management over the past few years has just been relying on Mahomes is going to save us. He's going to make these mediocre players we have around him look better than they are. And then before you know it, you look up and you're like, we don't have any young good players on this team. For real though, they don't have, outside of Trent McDuffie, I don't think they have a single player under the age of 24 or 25-ish who you would say is like an elite player. Although, actually, I don't remember how old Trey Smith and Creed Humphrey are, so maybe those guys. Josh Simmons, I think, could be elite. He just didn't play enough this year. A lot of weird stuff went on with him. But this offseason, basically, they have their first top 10 pick since they drafted Mahomes. A lot of people have been saying they need to go for Jeremiah Love or a wide receiver. I don't want to see him get Mekhi Lemon. His archetype has not worked out that well in recent years for the Chiefs. They need a big body guy who can beat man coverage, because that's what the Chiefs were terrible against. So I think they should either go for a wide receiver, but if one of them is there, I want them to take an elite defensive lineman or edge rush talent. Like Reuben Bain Jr. would be my ideal pick, because the main problem with this team was not the offense. It was the defense. Even though they were a pretty good defense in terms of points per game allowed, that was because They were good on first and second down, and they were one of the worst teams in the NFL on third. On third and long, it felt there were so many times I was watching this team, 3rd and 15, and I thought, here comes a first down. It didn't feel like they were gonna get off the field on 3rd and 15. So teams would just go on long procedural 3-down drives, or three downs to get first down, and it would take forever. So there weren't a lot of drives, but teams averaged a lot of points per drive against them. The Chiefs' offense also didn't have a ton of explosive plays. They had more explosive passes than in recent years, but they got nothing from the run game. So their drives were also slow. I mean, there was one stat, I think there were 5 times or 6 times this season, Mahomes led a fourth quarter drive to take the lead with 4 minutes or less left, and the defense gave up the lead. That can't happen. This defense they got old in a hurry, and the lack of any pass rush help for Chris Jones is really starting to rear its ugly head as he's gotten too old to take the whole weight himself. The offensive line, I think, is actually going to be fine. I don't think they need to get anybody from a high position for the offensive line. But I think their first 2 picks need to be a big body, man-beater wide receiver and an elite, or somebody who they think would be an elite edge rusher or a defensive lineman, because they have to have pass rush help. I want edge rusher first, because we have no more or Omar Norman Lott coming back from injury. I think he could be interesting next year. They need edge rush help, and then they need a wide receiver, and then you can go from there. They do need a new running back. I think they should try to sign either Breece Hall or Kenneth Walker. I'd prefer Breece Hall because after the Super Bowl, Kenneth Walker just boosted his contract by at least a few $1 million a season. Breece Hall, the reason I want them to go for Breece Hall over Jeremiah Love is because we already know Breece Hall can be an excellent NFL running back. And his contract is not going to be that much more expensive on a per-year basis than a first-round running back. Versus if you try to get a premier edge rusher, that contract is going to be way more than if you get a rookie edge rusher. And then it looks like Travis Kelce is going to come back. They need to restructure his deal. If he comes back, I want him to be back for about $10 million-ish a season. I would like them to try to get another tight end, but if he's back, they're not going to get another big name. When I thought he was going to retire, so I wanted them to go after Kyle Pitts, but that's not going to happen if he's coming back. They need to re-sign Tyquan Thornton. I hate that he got essentially benched. Andy Reid, for God knows what reason, decided to more or less bench Tyquan Thornton for a crippled Xavier Worthy, and it sucked because Thornton was awesome when he was on the field. So I want to see Thornton back. And Worthy should be better next year because he won't be injured, but he doesn't look like a first-round talent right now. You don't see the speed on the field. It's really sad. Now, I think they will get better because of the coaching changes. Eric Bieniemy should help make the coaching better. He should bring some, he helps the Bears become the best run game in the NFL. Even though they didn't have top-end talent. I thought DeAndre Swift was cooked. He had a great comeback season. They got a new wide receiver coach, which I think is huge. Their old guy, Connor Embry, head coached for 1 year at a high school level. There was no reason he should have ever been their receivers coach. And you'd hear stories out of the locker room about how, most of Rashee Rice, most of his coaching came from Travis Kelce and so just some of the other older wide receivers who they had in the locker room. DeAndre Hopkins, when he was there last season, was doing a lot. It was helping Rashee Rice with a lot of stuff. But nobody mentioned Connor Embry as a big reason they got better. So that's some of what I want the Kansas City offseason to look like. I think they can be back next year with a good offseason, but they really, really need a good offseason. I also think they should trade Trent McDuffie for... if Sauce Gardner is worth 2 first-round picks, Trent McDuffie, who's, I think, a 2 or 3-time All-Pro, is definitely worth a first and a second, or a first and a third, something like that. Because even though he's a slot corner, I know people think those are less valuable than outside corners, and maybe they are, but he's so versatile that I think he's worth at least something close to what Sauce Gardner went for, because everybody in the league knows that Trent McDuffie is better than Sauce. All right, so on the NBA for a little bit. If SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, if he's out for much longer, we're going to see the worst MVP race of all time. All right, the MVP race, it's going to be like Anthony Edwards, who is playing well, and then I don't even know who, because of the 65-game minimum, which I was a big fan of at the time, but I think they should probably get rid of it for the MVP because stuff like this can happen. And games played were always kind of taken into account in voting. So that's my quick little note on the MVP. I don't know what to do with LeBron on the Lakers. I love Luka, so I've been watching the Lakers most of the time. I think he can still play. You know, when I see him play, he doesn't look washed up. I mean, on defense, it's probably the worst I've ever seen him play on defense. But all the advanced numbers say that he makes the Lakers way worse. And even some non-advanced numbers, like they were a really good team. They were the second seed in the West before he came back. And since then, they've been just kind of average. They look like a legit contender with Luka and Austin Reeves, and since LeBron's been back, it's just not been good. So I don't know what you do with him at this point. Now I will say, back to the Thunder. The Thunder faltering a little bit with the pace they were on earlier this season. Them faltering is good for the NBA, because with what they were doing earlier on, it felt like there was no reason to even watch the games. It felt like the Thunder were just going to sleepwalk to the championship. You know, the race in the West was for the second seed, because you were just hoping that somebody on the Thunder might get injured before you have to play them. So, and then in the East, it just felt like who's going to get the privilege of getting belt to ass by the Thunder. So there was no drama. It felt so uncompetitive. Now that they faltered, it's a really interesting season now, because you got the Spurs, you even have the Pistons, who have been awesome, and then out of nowhere, the Hornets are like the best team in the NBA. I don't know what to do with that. Now, for the Thunder with the trade deadline, kind of turned into a crazy trade deadline. I'll just have one note. I think they should have gone for somebody like Lauri Markkanen. I love the Jared McCain move, but I think they should have reached into their bag of picks and tried to get somebody like Lauri Markkanen or Trey Murphy. I know those guys weren't technically on the trade market, but Sam Presti can make an offer and nobody can refuse. And they have so many picks, they literally can't keep all of them. But you can see whenever Shai is off the floor, the Thunder's offense just falls apart. They don't have another guy who can handle the rock right now. Jalen Williams has taken a big step back since last season. He has not been the second playmaker they need him to be. So I'm hoping Jared McCain can become that. I think he'll come back from his injury. He hasn't been great this season, but he's also a young player who went through 2 bad injuries. So I can see that taking a while for him to come back and get to what I think he can be, which is a really good ball handler. You know, he might not be a career 22 point per game guy like he was in his rookie year, but I could see him being an 18 point per game guy for the Thunder, you know, backing up Shai, which is what they need. All right, so final note. It'll be a shorter show today, but final note. I'm from Kansas. My dad went to KU. What is up with Darren Peterson? Okay, because when they played Arizona, when KU played Arizona and they won, Darren Peterson was ruled out for illness 30 minutes before the game. You know, if it's illness, you would know that almost a day in advance. So it really feels like for him, he has kind of decided, I'm going top 3 in the draft no matter what. I'm not getting injured again. And he's taking any excuse possible to skip games. And which sucks, because I like him as a player. To my eye, there's not a hole in his game. I think even though I'd like him to be more efficient, he can do everything. He's a great defender. He can shoot the 3, he can shoot the mid-range, he can get to the rim, and he can elevate. He's long. He's just got everything you'd want in a shooting guard. So my eyes tell me that he's a supreme talent, but I don't know about his mentality, because so far it seems like playing games is not a huge priority of his. And again, maybe because he's had an injury-prone season, He's just trying to skip as many games as possible so he doesn't get hurt for the draft. But I think it's how he's tackled games this season is a good example of why Europe is catching up to America in basketball. Winning for its own sake, I don't think is a big thing in American basketball anymore. For a while, you wanted to play because you wanted to win. But now when you have guys who, because of AAU and private teams and travel teams, guys are playing 4 games a week since they're, in middle school or even younger than that. So no game individually means anything, right? Like, if you're on your 3rd game of the week, you don't care if you win or lose. You care if you get your 20 and have a couple highlights, which is understandable because those are what get you noticed by the coaches because there's so many games that coaches can't really watch anything more than highlights. So I think the European style where you play 1 game a week, it's all about training and learning the game, and then you play 1 game a week. That 1 game matters so much that they care about it, and they're under pressure. That's why these guys come in and they're ready for big moments. I mean, why is it that it feels like every European player is just super clutch? And you got Luka, Jokic, Giannis. They've all been very clutch players in their career. And it's because they've been playing high-pressure games since they were 10. Every game there was pressure on them because if you lose, it's another week before you play. And there's not that many games to get into the playoffs or whatever tournament they have because, again, 1 game a week. You might only play 4 or 5 games before you get into your playoff tournament. So I think the AAU circuit is you're really going to start to see that hurt America even more as you see more guys like Darren Peterson, where college basketball isn't important for anything other than getting to the NBA, especially since you're being paid now. And I'm not really opposed to players being paid, but it does make it where they don't care. Players at this point, it feels like a lot of them don't care as much about the actual game and winning for the school. And, it's like they were bringing in so much value. Again, I'm fine with them being paid. But it just sucks now that it doesn't feel like there's this drive to win that there used to be, winning for the honor of your school that there used to be. If you win, it's only cool if you've dropped some highlights and had a lot of points. So, yeah. I hope Darren Peterson, there's not anything like that going on. But he's just had such a weird year. It's hard to not think that there's some kind of weirdness going on with how much he values playing. So yeah. Well, that's going to do it for the show today. Again, if you like the show, if you disagree with anything, please leave a comment, leave a like, and subscribe if you want to hear me again, because I don't have that many subscribers, so you probably won't find me again. So that's going to be all. Have a great day. Signing off for now. Peace.